I grew up in a small, rural town, tucked away from city life. We weren't too far from Richmond, Virginia, but you'd never know it with the quiet, open fields and the old dirt roads winding through patches of forest. My house sat on a hill right in front of a thick line of trees, woods that felt like a whole different world. As a kid, that stretch of forest between my house and the next street over might as well have been the Amazon. I'd play in there for hours, running over the crunch of dried leaves, ducking under branches, and pretending I was on some grand adventure. Being an only child, with no friends at school thanks to bullies who seemed to have a radar on me, the woods became my refuge. In that shady sanctuary, I'd meet my silent friends, the spiders. Big ones, small ones, and some with bright colors and long legs. They fascinated me. Each of them, hanging from their webs like eight-legged ornaments, busy just surviving. I imagined myself as a secret agent, darting through their invisible webs like they were laser beams. I respected the spiders. Unlike most people, I never saw them as pests. I'd even talk to them sometimes, as you might talk to a pet. "Hey there, little guy," I'd say. "Sorry if I wrecked your web." But my father, he never understood my kindness to the spiders or anyone else. He wasn't the father of the year type, more like a storm cloud that hung over my life. My mother died, giving birth to me, and I knew he blamed me. He never said it outright, but his eyes, his harsh silence, and the way he drank, always drinking, told me enough. My 11th birthday was when everything came to a head. I knew that day would be worse than most. My birthday was like a trigger for him, making him meaner, more vicious. I stayed out in the woods longer than usual, hoping he'd be passed out by the time I got home. When I walked in, the smell of whiskey was thick in the air, practically clinging to the walls. "Where you been, boy?" His voice was like gravel, slurred but clear enough to sting. I fumbled for words, knowing nothing I said would be enough. I was just outside with some friends," I stammered. "Friends?" His laughter cut through me, cold and sharp. "Don't lie to me. I know you ain't got no friends. You think you're funny, don't you, boy?" He paused, looking me over with disgust. "And you think you can just come in whenever you please? You know my rules. Be in before dark. Ain't nobody waiting up for you, you hear?" I could feel my face growing hot, my hands shaking. Then he smiled, a cruel, twisted smile. "You know what to do. Go pick a switch. If you don't know what that means, let me tell you. It means going out to pick a skinny, flexible branch so he can beat me with it. And if you come back with one he thinks isn't good enough, you'll pay for it." Outside, the cool evening air hit me, but it didn't calm me down. I picked the thinnest stick I could find, praying it might break before he got too many swings in. When I handed it to him, he let out a low, mocking chuckle. "You think this flimsy thing is going to save you?" His grip tightened on the stick. "I told you not to be late, and now you're giving me lip." Then the stick cracked against my arm, the sting spreading over my skin like fire. Another hit, and another. Each one sent a sharp jolt through me, my heart pounding faster, my eyes welling up with tears. I couldn't hold it back anymore, I cried out. But that only made him angrier, his face twisted with a fury that was somehow both calm and terrifying. "That's right, cry like the weak little boy you are," he sneered. When he tossed the stick aside, I thought maybe it was over. But then he reached for his belt. He pulled it off slowly, letting it drag from the loops with a menacing hiss. My heart was in my throat, every muscle in my body tensing. He wrapped the belt around his fist and looked at me with that cold, hateful glare. "Now front or back?" he asked, his voice as flat as stone. "Choose, or I'll decide for you." My throat went dry, and I couldn't answer. That silence enraged him even more. He tightened his grip on the belt, lifting his arm. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the blow, but it never came. What the?" he cried, stumbling backward. When I opened my eyes, I saw him swatting at the back of his neck, where a small spider lay crushed in his palm. "Stupid bugs," he muttered, wiping his hand on his jeans. In that split second, something snapped inside me. A sudden, wild thought filled my head, and before I knew it, I was running. I didn't think about where, I just knew I had to get away. My feet carried me across the yard, down the slope, and into the woods. I ran like I'd never run before, the sound of his drunken yells fading behind me. I reached the big tree, the one I'd always brought spiders to, my safe place, and collapsed against it, my lungs burning, my face wet with tears. But then, just as I began to catch my breath, I heard a heavy footfall behind me. I turned, and there he was, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can run from me, boy?" he snarled. Before I could react, his boot crashed into my face, sending me sprawling backward. I blinked through the pain, tasting blood in my mouth. He stood over me, his voice cold and dripping with venom. "You took my wife, my angel, and all you ever do is make excuses. I should have buried you years ago. You want to be out here so bad? Fine, I'll bury you right here." I shut my eyes, bracing for the final blow, but then I heard something, a low, chittering sound like clicking growing louder. My father turned, and his face went pale. Standing behind him was an enormous spider, its legs thick as tree trunks, its mandibles gleaming in the moonlight. It lunged, sinking its fangs into his shoulder. He screamed, a high, shrill sound I'd never heard before, as his body stiffened, his face contorted in agony. "Do not be afraid, young one," a voice echoed in my mind. The spider's words were strange yet comforting, as if it had always known me. "We do not mean you harm, but he shall not be so lucky." My father's body fell limp, paralyzed but still conscious, his eyes wide with horror as the creature began wrapping him in its massive, silken webs. The spider's voice continued in my head. "For years, you have shown kindness to us, a kindness rarely found. We do not forget those who show mercy. You are safe now, little one." I looked at my father, cocooned and helpless, his mouth moving soundlessly. He looked at me, pleading with his eyes, and I remembered all the pain, all the fear he'd caused. I stepped closer, my voice steady and cold. "Are you about to give me lip, boy? You know the rules. Pick a switch." His eyes went wide, and a moment of silence passed between us before the spider wrapped him up completely, lifting him into the trees. I watched as the shadows swallowed him, his muffled cries fading into nothingness.